An issue that, while controversial, is certainly something we should stay educated about is the production of greenhouse gases. The term greenhouse gas most commonly refers to methane, carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide. Even though we're far from fully understanding what effects the production of these gases could have on the environment, we, as citizens, have a responsibility to make our voices heard. In America, we make our voices heard by voting. We vote on some big decisions, and we vote for other people to make decisions for us. However, there is nearly an infinite amount of decisions that citizens make every day. What kind of car do I want to drive? How will I dress? And what will I have for lunch? Even though we don't go to a polling place, and there aren't formal election cycles being used, these decisions are votes. If I wear jeans, I'm voting for jeans. When I buy a pair of jeans, I'm giving money to a company who will inevitably use those dollars to spread the consumption of jeans through advertising, production, and sales. But more importantly, to the focus of this film, when I buy a T-bone steak that comes from a corn-fed cow, I'm voting for the agricultural industry to produce more corn-fed cows. The federal government might never pass a law mandating cows be fed corn or grass, so we vote with our wallets, and those votes are heard loud and clear by the entire industry. An issue brought to light in recent years is the effect cattle production and other agriculture has on the emissions of greenhouse gases. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has published statistics from a study by J.T. Houghton and Company, which estimates that livestock production can account for about 80 million metric tons of methane per year, which by their estimation is about 1/6 of all methane production nationwide. These studies have been conducted by taking small-scale studies of cattle and other livestock, placing them in environmental chambers, which measures and records all gaseous outputs from the animals inside of them. These results were then used to calculate estimates of emissions nationwide. Currently, corn-fed beef is an enormous majority nationwide, but trends towards organic, non-conventional food production have gained steam in recent years. Allow me to back up and explain the cattle feeding system most commonly used in the United States today. According to the National Cattlemen's Beef Association's educational report on how cattle are raised and fed, calves are sustained on milk from their mother and eventually some grazing for between 12 and 18 months. This grazing consists mostly of grass, some wheat, and hay. At the end of this period, the cattle are transitioned to a backgrounding diet, in which they eat a combination of pasture grass, hay, and some grain, most notably corn or barley. When cattle have reached an ideal weight of roughly 650 pounds, they are moved to a feedlot and transitioned to a finishing diet. This diet can last 3 to 6 months and is intended to fatten them up by between 2.5 and 4 pounds a day. A typical finishing diet may contain roughly 70 to 90% grains, of which most is corn. Even more interesting to the agricultural community may be a study performed by Karen Boschman and Sean McGinn in 2005, which suggests increased methane emissions from cattle fed organic or free-range grass diets compared to lower emissions from cattle feeding on high-grain finishing diets. This study used environmental chambers to record all gaseous outputs from cattle on various diets. Their 16 Angus heifers were conditioned to the chambers over an extended period of time to adjust comfortably to the environment and tested for 5 days at a time. The diets tested were corn, barley, and pasture-based. Their test showed that while pasture-fed cattle produce roughly 129 grams of methane per day, cattle on structured corn finishing diets, similar to those seen in feedlots in the final stages of production, only produced 62 grams of methane per day. It should be noted that corn backgrounding diets were shown to produce the highest level of emissions with 170 grams of methane per day. The data from this experiment was examined to be statistically significant with a p-value of 0.003. A value of 0.05 and below is considered to be statistically significant. A similar experiment was performed by Johnson & Johnson in 1995 and was also published in the Journal of Animal Science. While these data obviously suggest that pasture-fed cattle produce a stronger environmental footprint than those on a corn finishing diet, there are other factors as well. Arguments against corn-fed cattle also account for increased fuel usage. The same study through the IPCC shows significant contributions to methane production by gas and oil use, poor living conditions for feedlot cattle, and complicated subsidies related to corn production. So to go over some key points from these studies, livestock production is estimated to account for 1/6 of all methane emissions. In addition to this, while corn backgrounding diets were proven to cause the highest levels of methane emissions with 170 grams per day, pasture-fed cattle were shown to produce much higher levels than corn finishing diets. Pasture-fed cattle produced 129 grams per day, while corn finishing diets finished with less than half of that at 62 grams per day. It should also be noted that while the benefit of corn finishing diets may appear substantial, corn feeding can also contribute to increased fuel consumption, complicated ethanol subsidies, and harsh living conditions for cattle. Though cattle feed is a complicated issue which is far from being solved, being educated on the topic is extremely important because every time we buy a pound of hamburger, we are casting a vote.